Ooh, a spicy question. I
because
love
the writing is sort of everything, right? Like you kind of can fix plot holes, but if the writing isn't
so some
there,
readers love that, and some readers are like, but I wanted more of this. So it's kind of a gamble.
Hello and welcome back to the Right and Wrong podcast. On today's episode, we have a returning guest, formerly a senior editor at Chicken House Books, but has since moved to the US and become a literary agent. And as if that wasn't enough, she is also an author, having published her third YA novel, Let's Play Murder, last year. It's Kesia Lupo. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's so good to be back.
Yes, it's so nice to chat with you again. So much has changed since we last spoke, so I'm excited to get into it. Let's start with, first and foremost, the headline. That is that you have not only moved to the US, but you've also moved from editorial into literary agency. Was that something that you'd been thinking about for a while, or was it quite spontaneous?
It was not something I had considered. The main reason was just moving from the UK to the US on the West Coast. There aren't many publishers on the West Coast. I can think of maybe one or two. But therefore, there are very, very few editorial jobs. And it's still that kind of job that most people expect to be at least hybrid. So you're in the office a few days a week. So it was just a case of, I need to find a job in publishing because who knows what other industry will have me at this point, frankly. And it needs to be remote or something I can do from the San Francisco Bay Area. So the first agenting job that I got was just such a listing, and it was, full-time salaried position that was in publishing and remote. So I just thought, why not? And yeah, luckily I really enjoy agenting, so it was a good decision.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like one of the more common avenues into becoming an agent is from editorial. Like there's a lot of agents in the UK that I've spoken to who were editors and then became literary agents. So it's not like a wild, never been seen before transition.
No, it's very similar, that you use a lot of similar skills. The contacts that you built up as an editor will be helpful as an agent, the knowledge base that you have. So yeah, it does make sense. It wasn't completely out of the blue. And it was definitely on my radar as like something I could do in the future. But frankly, I was very happy being an editor. So it was a bit of a like, okay, let's try this now. Let's see what this is like. A bit of a risk,
okay.
But it has worked out.
So if you had, let's say, moved to New York, where there are lots of publishing houses, would you have applied for more editorial roles?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It was that was just the track that I was on, and it would have felt very natural to just go into that kind of area. But to be honest, I did apply to quite a few editorial jobs in New York just in case, I got one and then we could, relocate there. But, it's so competitive there. It's just a different world from the whole London scene. A whole different thing. So this was probably the better, more flexible option for me anyway, in retrospect. It's funny how life often works out that way.
Yeah, I do think that's true. And you mentioned the learning curve. Has it been relatively simple then transitioning the two roles, or have there been any kind of big surprises about being an agent that you weren't aware of?
It was a learning curve. I think so. To give a fuller background, I agented with an agency called The Bindery for about 14 months, and then I lost that job. And probably losing that job was the biggest learning curve that I encountered, because it was basically all to do with money and the fact that being an agent is really a sales position, when you really drill down into it. So all of that is very different from being an editor. As an editor, you're not really expected to sell a certain number of copies of any book. Yes, there's still that kind of pressure of, acquiring things that are good and acquiring things that will sell. But ultimately, it's a whole team effort. So you can't really blame any one person for anything that goes wrong. Whereas with agenting, it's pretty much 100% on your shoulders if you can't sell what you take on. And I actually did pretty well in comparison to a lot of people, in the first year of agenting, I think because I had all those existing contacts. And it wasn't like I didn't sell anything. I sold like 5 books and 3 of those were, actually 4 of those were big publishers. 3 of them were big 5. So it was good. It was just that they were paying me a salary that they needed to make back for it to make sense for the business. So that kind of shock of losing that job, which I've never lost a job before, but also realizing like this is sales, this is like how tough it can actually be, was something that I hadn't, I mean, it sounds so silly, but I just hadn't quite expected that to hit me in the face quite so much. Like I was like, yeah, sure, it's pitching and it's like, all of those sales skills, which I was more than happy to learn, but that reality of what it is to work in a sales job was tough. But yeah, I've now found another agency on a different type of contract, and that I think that's going to work out a lot better for me overall.
Okay, that's good. Because I was confused because we have lots of mutual friends, and I follow your antics even as you've gone overseas. But I was thinking, like, in your first sort of year of agenting, you've sold a lot of books to publishers. Was it just not enough? Like, because I was almost surprised at how many you'd sold, and then for you to no longer be at that agency.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that were unique about that agency. So for instance, they really specialized in the Christian market. So they weren't like general market specialists. They're very, very, very good at what they do in the Christian market, and a little more broadly in like nonfiction. But they didn't have anyone on the team doing fiction. They hired me as like someone to expand the list. But as a very small business, I think they have, it's like 6 or 7 agents. And they've only been going since 2017. They wanted to do the right thing and pay a salary and all of that. But as a small business, it just wasn't really sustainable with the returns that I was getting in the moment. And I've kind of drilled down into this in my Substack a little bit, but briefly, if you think about the average salary, which is, I don't think I'm divulging too much by saying I was on the average salary, but the average salary in the US is 60,000. To make that back, you have to sell, I think it's something like $500,000 worth of contracts. But the way that payments work with publishers is that they come in thirds. So you're only ever going to receive a maximum of a third of that money in the first year. And of course, you have no existing contracts, no sales or anything. So it is, I think I almost got to the advances that would have made back my salary, or at least sort of 75% of the way there. They would have made back the salary over the coming years. But it wasn't within that first year. So I think as a business, they were just it's not enough. And I don't think they realized, how, they realized intellectually, they were very, very, very experienced in the business. And we really have parted on great terms. But yeah, in terms of the mass market fiction area, it is more competitive, and it is you're just not going to close as many deals because there's, hundreds of other agents, thousands of, other qualified authors, a diminishing pool of editors, it's just really tough. So yeah, so it was, that was not great, but actually it was a great learning experience. And the way I'm thinking about it is, they gave me this opportunity to build a list of authors, most of which I've brought with me. And I was on a stable full-time income while I was doing it. And that is a huge gift. So I'm just really grateful that it all kind of happened in the first place, and trying not to be down about how it ended.
Yeah. It's looking good now. And you've landed in a good place as a result of that.
Yes, I'm now at the Donald Mass Literary Agency, which is much more in the area that I'm interested in. So that, you know, I think they're one of the top agencies, especially for SFF. If you look at them on Publishers Marketplace, I think they've got like the most deals in that area, and they're just really well respected. Donald's a lovely guy, and we just had, you know, several conversations before I decided to sign. So it just feels like a very good, supportive place. And instead of being on a salary now, I'm on a commission agreement, which means that I can work outside of that. And like, so I'm making my money in a different way until I sell something, which, although is not, you know, immediately as stable, it is a lot less pressure and a lot less like, you know, I'm not afraid of repeating the same pattern again, which would have been really, really difficult.
Yeah, I can imagine. And presumably, in terms of taking most of your list with you, is that Bindery was kind of happy for that to happen because they, like you say, they focus very much on a Christian literature market, and your list is not really that.
Well, I think they're happy because, you know, whatever happens, I don't know how many people know this, but the agency that you sign your contracts with a publisher with, if that makes sense, they always keep that contract. So it's not like I'm taking the contracts with me. You know, it's taking the authors with me for future contracts. So they should still continue to earn like royalties and stuff like that from those contracts I did sign. But yeah, they're more than happy for me to take forward the authors because they don't have anyone else there who's really handling the same thing, and because they want to do right by me. Like, you know, they're nice people, so they were very, very smooth in the whole process of like handing over. Like, I managed to like almost seamlessly take submissions that were, you know, say I'd gone on sub with something just before I left. They sort of managed it while I wasn't agenting, and now they've handed it back over to me at a new agency, which I think is pretty unheard of, actually, for it to be that smooth. So I am really grateful to them. They have handled it very, very well.
Yeah, it sounds like as amicable as it could be, given, you know, it's obviously not an ideal situation for anyone.
Yes.
I'd love to know, so now that you're an agent, you've been an editor and an author, you have this sort of almost, I imagine you're a very select few people who have the perspective of being all three of those roles within publishing. Is it weird now that you're on like this new side of things, like looking back at the other two, having been like sort of right in the middle of those?
Yeah, I mean, it feels everything is very close. Like, you know, being an author and working with authors are quite similar because you're kind of dealing with the same worries and concerns and creative issues and all of that. It's just sort of from the other side. And, you know, you're working with authors as both an editor and an agent in different ways. You know, it's really interesting. I feel like doing each job has added a little perspective to the other, which is great. And actually now I'm also book selling part-time. So that is actually even a bigger kind of perspective shift than either of these three, because you're on the like, okay, it's now a finished product. Like, what happens next, which I've never experienced before either. So in fact, I would say that editing and agenting and being an author all feel closer to me than something like book selling, or I imagine like marketing or something like that. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, they all use the same, like, similar skills. Whereas, there's stuff that's more different in publishing for sure. But it is interesting, definitely. Yeah,
those three are like quite adjacent in terms of the, like, obviously as a literary agent you are interacting with editors on one side and the author. You're basically in the middle now, whereas before you were on the two roles either side.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like little steps in either direction. But you know, there's definitely big differences, and I kind of felt that. Well, I think you always feel as an editor that the author and their agent has maybe a slightly closer relationship, and I do feel like that's borne out a little bit for me, in that, you know, you sometimes work with these authors for, you know, months and months, if not years, before they actually get a deal. So the real persistence and the length of time that relationship can take, and the projects that you work on together, and the editorial closeness that comes with that, you know, it sometimes does trump, like, you know, the editor then coming in at the publisher just at the very end of the process. And it's been really nice to experience that kind of closeness of a agent author relationship.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting to hear about, because I mean, a lot of authors do become very close with an editor, especially after doing multiple books, and I'm sure you know that better than me. But it's interesting to hear that you kind of, as a literary agent, you kind of perceive it now as like, well, the editor only comes in at the end. Whereas I imagine when you were editing, it didn't feel like you were coming in at the end.
No, it was like, okay, now we're going to start working on this book. And, you know, you intellectually know that like more has gone on before, but you don't see it. So it's been kind of cool to kind of extend the journey of a book a little bit, and you know, and now I understand, you know, why agents can be so important. Obviously, every relationship is a little bit different, and some authors are probably closer to their editors and their agents and all of that, but I do kind of now understand why sometimes it's like this, you know, and thank you to my editor, but really thank you to my agent who got me this deal, and like who worked with me for like 5 years before on like 4 different books, and like, you know, now I get it, which is, it's really cool to see and experience.
Yeah, and I guess if you look at it from purely a business point of view, the agent is signing an author with no money incentive. You know, like they'll be together trying to land a deal, and there will be nothing. An editor is always being paid to do that role.
Yeah,
not that diminishes
it's just
it, but
it doesn't diminish it. You know, especially if that editor is the one that acquired the book, or it was you know, closely involved in acquiring the book. You know, they'll still have so much passion for the project, and you know, in some, you know, the publisher is where the money is coming from ultimately. So you know, as an editor on a salary, you don't treat a book differently because it got a low advance or because it got a high advance, as you know, in terms of the actual editing. Like, it's a standard process. As an agent, like every single project you take on needs something different to get it to the point where it's ready to pitch. And like you said, you know, if you don't sell it, you're not going to earn anything. So you're very much like working alongside and partnering with the author to try and get that sold. So it's kind of just a different balance of elements, even though you're doing similar jobs.
Yeah, and I like you said, I'm sure there's a lot of crossover, which, and having been on both sides of the literary agent, I'm sure that there's been a lot of things where you're suddenly like, yes, I get it, because I've seen this from that side and I've seen it from that side. Yeah,
and that's something I think my authors appreciate overall, although I'm sure I could get you know, I'm sure it can get annoying when you're like, oh, I've been there, like I know that too, oh, I've already, you know, whatever. But I think overall it's a good thing to have all of that perspective, and it's not exhaustive. You know, there's a lot of differences between different publishers and differences between different agencies and how people individually work. So I don't know everything, but it certainly brings a different perspective.
For sure. So as a literary agent, well, first of all, I'd love to know how many authors are currently on your list, roughly, if you don't know the exact number.
I know the exact number, as I've had to re-sign every single one of them in the last 2 weeks. So 14.
Okay, great. Which obviously, you know, you're still relatively new in this field. You've got a lot of room to grow that list, and presumably that's something you are excited and kind of very actively doing.
Yes, and I should acknowledge that I lost a few authors along the way. So between losing one job and getting another, which is really sad. So I did have 17 or 18, 17, I think. But you know, that creates a bit more space on the list as well. And as I try and figure out kind of how big my list should be, I can, you know, have that, I can definitely use that extra space. So it is fine. But But I did feel like one of the funny things about moving from being like a full-time salaried agent to now being on commission is like, I'm going to be doing the same work that I was doing, but sort of squeezed into sort of different spaces. So I don't think it's a terrible thing that I've like shrunk my list slightly, and I won't be looking to grow it quickly. You know, I really want it to be sustainable and to be able to give every author on the list like the time that they need, like, because it is a, you know, a time intensive job where you're reading a lot of stuff and like having a lot of conversations. So yes, I am looking to grow the list again, but also I want to do it in a probably a slower way than I was before, in a much more sustainable way.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Because, and I think the other thing is once the list is larger, and this is from agents that I've spoken to, once, a lot of the time, if you kind of land a book deal, if it's a multi-book deal, even better, that author often doesn't need as much attention from you, which is then it's a good time for you to potentially sign, you know, there's now a bit more space in the list and now you can pick up someone else. And then that kind of is like an ongoing cycle where ideally you're always finding new publishing deals, which is freeing up more space for you to either take on new authors or double down on kind of the authors you already have.
Yeah, that's the idea. And, you know, multi-book deals are great for that reason. I think actually most of the deals I did were like only 1 or 2 books, so I may not have quite that that flexibility, but yes, that is the idea.
Okay, right. And an interesting thing I was thinking about with, and this applies more to publishers, but I think it still applies to agents. When we talk about like how much room there is on an agent's list, is it a big factor for you when you're looking at someone if they are writing in a very similar kind of space or style to another author that's already on your list? Like, is it difficult to have 2 authors that would be competing in the same market?
Yes, especially though if they're both like, so if one of them has a deal already and then the other one is like similar but it's it's different enough, then obviously you're not going to pitch it to the same publisher that already has the first one, but there may well be room in the market for, if you're seeing demand for that kind of thing, then why not? I think what's more difficult is if you have 2 authors who are both looking for publishers at the same time, writing in quite a similar space, then you'll essentially be competing with yourself because a publisher will be unlikely to take on both. So that is a serious consideration.
Yeah, I can see how that's, because I've also spoken to agents who have been sort of upset that they couldn't sign someone because they just didn't have they loved it, but it's like, I already have 2 authors who are writing things which kind of are either side of this, and it would be too much for me to sign this and then try and be selling all of those. And
it is quite surprising sometimes how close unrelated, like authors who don't know each other, how close they can get in concept as well. Like I'm not going to say what the concept is because it's unfair, but there was one author I wanted to take on but lost out on, who wrote a book with a very specific concept. And literally yesterday, I read in my query manager a book that was honestly nearly identical in concept. It was written in a completely different way with different characters, but it was just too similar. It's quite remarkable how that can happen. And I'm, almost 100% sure they'd never spoken, that they just independently came up with this idea, from 2 very different angles. And it came out very, very similar. So it is remarkable how that can happen. And obviously anything like that, like you really can't have 2 of anything with the exact same concept, even if one has sold, because it's just like literally like another publisher wouldn't take it on because they'd be like, oh, this publisher already has one that sounds too similar. So that's a real tough thing as a writer, I think, to know that. I guess it gives everyone the feeling that like unless they get to the concept first, then it will be quote unquote taken. But I still think it's quite rare. Like that's a very specific kind of example. And what's more usual is a lot of authors writing in a specific subgenre at the same time, and then you have to sort of see what rises to the top. Which, yeah, as a writer is very tough.
Yeah, I can totally see that, and especially if so many things are sold on concept at the moment, as in like the pitch is really like, oh, this is the really cool, snappy idea, and like you say, if that's already been sold, another publisher is not going to want that because they're going to say, well, that book's already been published, and like if the concept really is the kind of main selling point of that, it's not going to be appealing to do a sort of slightly different version.
Yeah, no one wants to be seen to be just following or just, just doing the same thing. Everyone wants to be seen to be original.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, which is rough.
So for your list, what are the sort of age ranges that you're looking at? What are the genres? What are you looking at for queries and to add to your list?
So I'm looking at the moment, I'm open only to middle grade just for this week. And I'm going to do a system where I open 1 week per month, but each month will be like a different age range and genre within this spectrum. So just so you know, so middle grade, YA and adult fiction. Genres, I'm pretty flexible, to be honest. I can't really think of many that I don't do. Like one example would be like anything in a super specific market, like police procedurals, or I can't think of anything else that's sort of similar, but like very, very
psychological thrillers.
Yes, well, no, psychological thrillers are okay if they've got a broad appeal. It's kind of those like subsets where I just haven't worked on them. So the best thing to do is probably like look at my manuscript wish list. If you're in doubt, just submit. I don't, I don't mind. I'd rather people submit it and then I get to see what it is and turn it down if it's not right, than people self-reject. So although there's probably some things that aren't for me, like I am very broad and I'd rather, see everything within middle grade, YA and adult. And then I am doing a small amount of adult nonfiction, which I started doing towards the end of my time at the Bindery. And so I have one author who I really, really like and want to continue working with. So I'm going to just continue to remain open to other nonfiction projects and just see what lands. But that will be within quite specifically sort of historical, cultural history, popular psychology, those maybe kind of sociological stuff, but like again, like I'm talking accessible mass market kind of stuff. Like I'm not going to be going into academic publishing at all. So those kinds of general areas, which is quite broad, and that's why I'm limiting myself a little bit and limiting each window of submissions to something different. So although it may be quite annoying as an author from the other side, because you don't want to have to keep checking like, oh, like what's she open to now, it will really help me like manage the quantity of submissions and be very targeted about what I want to take on, what gaps are on my list. So that's the general idea.
Okay, right. Is this a new system that you're implementing from like learning from how you were doing it before?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I did a thing before where I was like, I want to be open all the time. Like, I don't like this like opening, closing, like blah, blah, blah. I'm just going to stay open and, deal with it. And then I got thousands and thousands of queries. Like, I genuinely was like, I think it'll trickle off. I think it'll be like, there'll be a rush when I open and then it will like steady out and I'll be getting much fewer because I'll exhaust the pool. But that never happened. And when I left, I think I still had something like 2,000 submissions I hadn't looked at, which is really horrible. And really stresses me out, actually, just having that like length of to-do list effectively. So this is what I've learned and what I'm putting in practice now. I think it's going to go a lot better for me.
Yeah, I think that is probably a very healthy way of doing it. And also you can also then, if you need to catch up on a backlog, you could always take a week off just to catch up and then you can go back on. And that's an interesting way of doing it. And it also means you can be in a certain headspace. So you can be in your MG headspace, Yeah.
Yeah. And I've seen other agents do similar. I think Louise Buckley actually suggested this to me, and so I'm really grateful to her. I think she's open like the first week of every month, and I've seen a lot of the people that do it, like most people are open the first week of every month, but I've chosen the third week, partly because I'm being different and trying to give people more opportunities, but partly also because I happen to start the job in the second week of the month. So I was like, okay, not going to wait 3 weeks to open. So yeah, that's the rationale.
I think you probably also will filter out a lot of the kind of people who are just sort of carpet bombing and sending stuff to every single agent, because if you're only open specific times, then people need to know which week it is that you're, which week you're open, which week you're accepting a specific thing, and not just
that's true
catching strays and getting sent stuff that you would never imagine representing.
Yeah, that has been borne out so far, I think, the ones that I've seen. Yeah.
Before we saunter back to the desert island, I did want to check one thing. So I know at least one of your authors is based in the UK. Well, Noami is based in the UK, and I know that. So obviously you're living in the US now, but you have a few authors in the UK. Are you putting any kind of additional focus into the UK, or are you doing a kind of completely international list?
I think I'll always have strong links to the UK. So most of my contracts, so I closed one contract with a Big Five US publisher, but all of my other contracts, but one, which was a smaller publisher, are UK. So from a perspective of like being more known in the UK and me knowing more editors in the UK, I think it's always going to be on a par at least with the US, even though I'm physically here. I wouldn't want to lose the benefits that, my previous career have basically given me in terms of grounding me in that market. So it's going to be a completely international list, and I'm not going to cancel anyone out because of their location. But I think especially US and UK authors, because that's going to be and Irish authors too, because I have a fantastic Irish author who's got a deal with an imprint of Bonnier that's based in Ireland, and that's worked out great. So I'm going to continue to basically look at the British Isles as a home market for me, alongside the US.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like you say, that's where you'll obviously have such an incredible base of knowledge of just the kind of the vibe and the feeling of how the British market operates, because the US, I'm sure it varies state by state, but obviously it's very, very different to what's popular in the US is not the same as what's popular in the UK necessarily.
Yeah, there's a bit of crossover, but especially in children's, it's just a different beast, really. And I don't know it as well. I know the UK better. So for me, it's still, while I'm learning about the US and finding my feet here and like trying to sell more stuff here, I definitely will continue just pitching in the UK. And actually everything that I've sent on submission, I've sent on simultaneous submission in both places. And I like that, because it's just like, you're just trying to find a deal for the author, the best deal. Why limit yourself to just one territory? You can double their chances. Not quite, because the UK is not quite as big, but you know what I mean? You can definitely increase their chances. Yeah,
absolutely. And I've heard that. I was speaking to an agent recently, and she was saying that very kind of UK, like British themed middle grade is doing quite well in the US.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't heard that, but I'll have to investigate. I mean, I do get, it's too British sometimes.
Yeah.
So I haven't had the opposite, but I like that idea, and I hope that agent is right. We'll maybe have to explore that a little bit.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Okay. We are at the time where we head over to the desert island. Of course, you have been to the desert island already. And do you remember what you chose last time?
Yes, I think I did. I think I chose the Gormenghast trilogy.
You did, yes.
Yeah.
Some classic fantasy.
Which I think I stick with. Yeah, because I think the rationale was like, I want to get lost in a different world and I need something like big and complicated to kind of engage my mind because I'm going to be so bored. And, you know, actually the Gormenghast trilogy is one of the more difficult, I think, fantasy series I've ever read. Like, it wasn't like it's not just like you skim through it as an easy read or whatever. It's, it's challenging and there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of things to understand. But I think that's a benefit. So I'm going to stick with it.
Nice. I like that conviction. Next up, we are going to chat queries, cover letters, and all that jazz. But that will be in the extended episode available on Patreon. If you're not sure, just
don't
send it.
Self-reject. Yeah, definitely.
There you go. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Kesia, for coming on the podcast and catching up with me and telling us all about everything you've been up to and everything you're working on at the moment. It's been awesome chatting with you.
Oh, it's been great. Thanks, Jamie.
And for anyone wanting to keep up with what Kesia is doing, you can follow her on Twitter at Kesia Lupo, on Instagram and Threads at Kesia Lupo Author. And if you are thinking about querying, head over to the Mars Agency website where you can find the link to Kesia's query tracker, as well as a refresher on all the things that she's looking to add to her list. To support the podcast, like, follow and subscribe, join the Patreon for ad-free extended episodes, and check out my other podcast, The Chosen Ones and Other Tropes. Thanks again, Kesia, and thanks to everyone listening. We will catch you on the next episode.
How do you feel when you switch to Geico and save on your car insurance? It's like going to work on Thursday morning and thinking to yourself, just one more day until Friday. But then somebody walks into the elevator and says,
Happy Friday!
Then you check your phone quickly and discover today is actually Friday. So yes, happy Friday, random stranger in the elevator. Happy Friday indeed. Yep, switching and saving with Geico feels just like that. Get more with Geico. How do you feel when you switch to Geico and save on your car insurance? It's like getting right out of bed late for work, yet your hair looks immaculate. No blow dryer, no comb, no sculpting gel. Just a flawless look. As if you walked out of your house and straight onto the cover of a men's fashion magazine.
Good morning, Steven. Oh, have you done something new with your hair? It looks amazing.
They don't have the slightest clue you were half asleep, drooling on your pillow not 10 minutes ago. Yep, switching and saving with Geico feels just like that. Get more with Geico.